losses. Welcome into the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News. Travis Reier, the longtime senior analyst with BamaOnline.com, along, as we always are, twice weekly in the fall, breaking down Alabama football. The Talkin Tide podcast Twitter feed, of course, is Talkin_Tide. That's the handle. Jump on there, give us a follow. You'll get links right away to these twice weekly podcasts. You can get us on Apple Podcasts as well, and we're live on Facebook and YouTube. Want to thank Peterbrook Chocolatier of Tuscaloosa and also Heat Pizza Bar in downtown Government Square. More on them a little later in the program. Two fine local sponsors of Talkin Tide. And with that, we're back after a 1 week respite from the idle week to preview this Alabama-LSU game upcoming at Bryant-Denny Stadium, a 6:45 Central Time kickoff, CBS broadcast. Alabama comes in unbeaten in SEC play, 5-0. LSU 4-1 in the league, Travis. And this is the one, Travis, that this game's got national eyes, not just regional eyes, for sure. College football playoff implications potentially, and certainly the biggest game of the year to date in the SEC West.
Seems like we say that about every year. I know Auburn has had some success along with LSU relative to everyone else anyway when it comes to Alabama under Nick Saban. But you're right. There's a reason why it seems like year in, year out, this is a primetime CBS game, not just CBS, not just the 2:30 slot, but primetime CBS. It has taken that place in the pecking order in the Southeastern Conference over the last decade and a half or more.
Pulling for the Tigers, certainly, Travis, will be Ole Miss as we look at the SEC West standings. The Rebels want to see Alabama take that loss and kind of drag the standings into that three-way tie. Just for fun, and it's a look ahead, there's a lot of football left to be played. Ole Miss still has Georgia, for goodness sakes. A lot can happen, but just for fun, I looked ahead at what the tiebreaker scenario might look like if it ended up being a three-way tie with all three of those teams beating each other and with one loss in the league. And I think it went to – if you go to the SEC's official website and look at the tiebreaker list, they don't list it numerically. They list it alphabetically. It's tiebreaker A, B, C. I think you go all the way down to G, Travis, before you find how they would finally break it up. And if I remember right, it has something to do with overall record of teams you beat in the other division or some such crazy thing that's way past who won head-to-head.
Yeah, and you're right. We got a little ways to go before needing to sort all that out. But it is fascinating because of the potential ramifications of an LSU win potentially over Alabama this week. And then if Ole Miss does the sort of unthinkable, goes into Athens in a couple Saturdays and wins on the road, you look at this from the LSU perspective too. I mean, this is the game. There's no doubt about it. But it sets up pretty well for LSU if it wins this game because it gets home games in the month of November after this with Florida and Texas A&M. So quality of opponent still could be an issue for the Tigers, even playing at home. But it still feels like this is going to be the game that determines the representative from the West to Atlanta.
The chatter certainly is all about that LSU offense against the Alabama defense. That's kind of the matchup, I think, that's going to have fans excited. That's definitely going to pull a lot of TV ratings. LSU comes in with the number one offense in all of college football, 553 yards per game. Travis, the punter for the Tigers, the Bramblitt's his name, he's punted 15 times in 8 games. That's one punt a half, basically, for the year. Tells you all you need to know about that LSU offense, doesn't it?
Hillcrest High School graduate.
I didn't know that.
Bramble.
How about that?
He's a Tuscaloosa guy. Was with Kelly at Notre Dame before transferring to LSU. So even got ties with the specialists in this one, Goodbread.
No doubt about it. Huge challenge for the Alabama defense, but the Alabama defense looks up to challenges, I think. At this point, Travis, they're playing they seem to be clicking on all cylinders. The pass rush has been very consistent. The secondary, I think, is playing well. Sometimes the run fits maybe not quite what you'd like, maybe not quite what you saw from what Alabama's defense was bringing, 4 or 5 years ago. But this defense is hell against the pass because they bring it from both edges and up the middle. Jaden Daniels, of course, a Heisman Trophy candidate quarterback in the Tigers, gave Alabama fits last year in the Tigers' overtime home win over the Crimson Tide. But definitely that Alabama defense, and specifically the pass rush, working against LSU in the passing game is going to be exciting for sure.
Yeah, and just how Alabama goes about that, because we heard Nick Saban talk about it earlier in the week. A couple of times, Alabama in the game a year ago in Baton Rouge, not disciplined enough in its approach to Jaden Daniels. He made them pay on some busted pass rush attempts from the Alabama defense. And I still say, as much as we're going to talk about that right up until kickoff and into the game Saturday night, Alabama also gave it up not just to Jaden Daniels on the ground a year ago, but also to the running back position. And that, Logan Diggs is playing some really good football, the Notre Dame transfer, another one of those guys on this LSU team. When you just look at SEC play for him, once he really got it going in conference play to go along with Daniels, now you got that two-way conflict in that zone read game and just the run game in general. And so you got to take care of Diggs too. You can't give it up even to the extent that Alabama did a year ago between that quarterback and running back dynamic.
Yeah, what I like about the zone read game LSU runs is how long Daniels holds the mesh point, right? And I saw this primarily when LSU played Missouri in a shootout and beat them late. Ended up beating them, I think, with a pick six, at least how they clinched it. But both offenses went up and down the field in that one. That's the game I've gotten to see the most of LSU so far this season. And Daniels, he'll hold that mesh point so long, he'll actually kind of take a half a step with Diggs, right, headed toward the middle before he pulls or doesn't pull. And that little delay, I think it makes a big difference, because if he sees what he wants to see and gives it to him, Diggs will pop it right up the middle for huge yards. LSU can spring it right through the heart with Diggs on that zone read game. And as much as it's important for Alabama's defense to contain Daniels, the last thing they need is for the C to be parting and the A gaps with that initial give.
Yeah, last year it was Josh Williams that had limited carries against Alabama, but he still ran for 50+ yards, averaged around 7+ a carry in that game. And you're right, it is that delayed mesh, similar to what we've seen from Wake Forest, especially when Sam Hartman was with Wake the previous few seasons before Notre Dame. It always seems to go back to Notre Dame tonight, I guess, for me. But for sure, I mean, you got to take care of that first and foremost. I know it sounds crazy, but you actually want to see 35, 40 dropbacks for Jaden Daniels. Dropbacks, and not just off of zone read action and those type of things. You want to put LSU more into a throw it on almost every down type of status. And, Alabama in the interior of that defensive line, I think that's where you have some optimism from that perspective, is because Tim Keenan, Tim Smith, what you've seen from Damon Payne, obviously when you talk about Jaheim Otis, Justin Aboibe, they have the kind of guys up front that can go a long way in helping to slow that down.
A lot of weapons for LSU at the wide receiver position as well. Malik Neighbors has had a huge year. He's not the only one, but Daniels has got a lot of options for sure. In the passing game, he'll hit the tight ends. He can do it all, and yeah, I'm not sure. Even if Alabama plays well against LSU defensively, they could still have to score in the 30s to win it. At least that's how I'm looking at it, Travis. It's it's a challenge for the Alabama defense. I don't think it's an offense that you can shut down by any means. I just think you got to play really well in the red zone, right? Force field goals wherever you can. A field goal is a win for the defense in this game. It is in any game in college football anymore, but especially I think this matchup.
Yeah, you got to keep explosive plays from getting to the end zone. They're going to hit, both teams are going to hit some explosive plays, probably more than a few Saturday night. But the key for both defenses will be safety play. I think Alabama can feel pretty good about that with Caleb Downs back there. I think he's going to be important, not just in terms of the explosive pass plays, but when Daniels pops it from time to time, you got to get him on the ground. And as you said, make LSU earn it from the red zone. Make LSU score touchdowns from inside the 20. Don't just give up the big plays that end up going for scores. And that's really been a strength for Alabama, as we know, with Jalen Milroe and that passing game. And I think there's going to be some layups for Alabama when it does throw the football in the intermediate to deeper ranges. But Alabama, as we'll talk about, I'm sure too, that quarterback running back dynamic that it might employ on the offensive side of the ball in the run game.
Perfect time to switch around and talk Alabama offense versus the LSU defense. The Crimson Tide comes in. I think Travis at a fairly high level of confidence offensively, probably as much offensive confidence as this team has had to date this season. And that's not to say they're necessarily feeling like they can beat the world, but there's been some steady progress. There are still problems. There are still holes and issues that the coaching staff has now had a couple of weeks to try to get shored up down the stretch this season. But the offense is playing better. The offensive line in particular is starting to get a little better. Still some issues here and there. It's not a dominant line by any stretch, but it's moving forward. Seth McLaughlin's playing better football right now than he was certainly earlier in the season, for one. Running game's been up and down, but Milroe, I think, is feeling pretty good about himself these days, and I think the wide receivers have played pretty well also, Travis. And from the LSU perspective, the talk this week is injuries, right? I mean, they're beat up. Mekhi Wingo on the defensive line out. You've got Zaya Alexander out, Denver Harris out. It's a little bit of a mash unit on that side of the ball for the Tigers.
It is, and I think a lot of the focus has been on those transfer defensive backs that LSU brought in that aren't going to be able to go, 3 or 4 of them in this game on Saturday night. But I think Mekhi Wingo, the loss there, could be especially big because even while you still have Mason Smith on that defensive line, you still have Harold Perkins that you have to deal with, and there are some serviceable guys on that LSU defensive front. Alabama should have the ability to run it when it wants to run it, perhaps in this game. And that could be really big as far as game control is concerned, because Nick Saban would love to turn this into sort of Ole Miss from a couple of years ago in Tuscaloosa when Alabama held the ball for like 40 minutes and Ole Miss had it for about 20. Alabama won that game 42-21, I believe, in Tuscaloosa. To be able to control the game in that fashion would be ideal. But I also think it's going to be hard at times to sort of turn away from the opportunities Alabama should have should it want to throw the football.
Yeah, good time to talk about pace. Travis, Alabama definitely doesn't want to get in a shootout with LSU. Alabama is not going to be in good shape if this game gets into the high 30s, low 40s, or even higher than that. Alabama wants to keep this game in the 20s. If you're playing LSU, the best way to do that is to eat some clock where you can, chew up some first downs on the ground as best you can. It takes consistent running down to down, especially on first down. And Alabama's done poorly on first down for a lot of the season, frankly. That's how Jalen Milroe's ended up in so many third and longs. Although against Tennessee, I thought Alabama did pretty darn well on first down.
In the second half, for sure, right? As that game moved along, and that was a major key. And also, LSU's not really going to try to speed it up on offense. They're not what Nick Saban likes to refer to as a fastball team. So
Right.
you don't have to concern yourself probably with that as much as far as number of plays that your defense might see in this game. But explosive plays both ways. LSU defensively, even before all of this, with the players it won't have on Saturday night on that side of the ball, had given up 5 plays of 50 yards or more. That's a lot, and
Yeah.
so I think Alabama is actually being undersold a little bit on offense in terms of its explosive play capability in this game. So whereas you'd like to maybe keep this into Bula ball in some ways with your run game, I think even from that perspective, Jace McClellan, the other backs are going to have some opportunities to hit for some chunks.
Harold Perkins, the outstanding defender for the Tigers, worth a mention as well. Travis, Nick Saban was asked about him twice, once by me tonight, as a matter of fact, at his news conference. The guy is not only a phenomenal pass rusher, he can get out in space and make plays, make solo tackles on the perimeter. He chases the ball pretty much wherever he's got to go. So he's hell. It's not just a situation where Caden Proctor and J.C. Latham have to be able to handle the edge. That's not the only challenge with this guy because he's everywhere and he lines up in a lot of places.
Yeah, you got to figure out where he's at down by down, really. And as much as we talk about him as a pass rusher, as we should, you talked about that Missouri game. He had an interception that really turned that game because that was looking like Missouri may put some serious distance between itself and the Tigers in that game in Columbia. And then he makes the play and kind of turned on that. So I think the temptation with a guy like Harold Perkins is similar to what Alabama experienced probably with Will Anderson. You got to be careful not to try to do too much with him. Sometimes it's better just to put a guy where he's most comfortable and tell him to go make plays instead of, well, we're going to line you up at inside linebacker in this look. You're going to be, with your hand in the ground on this look. You're going to be on the edge standing up. We're going to have you in some zone concepts where you're in space and pass coverage. Simple sometimes is better when you have a talent like that.
Speaking of simple, Travis, we turn to the Vegas man and the ticket man. -3, 1 field goal. That's what they're saying out there. Line started last week, and by the way, because Alabama and LSU were both idle this past week, the spread came out early. Right? Might as well get the action going as soon as you can. Right? And it was 4.5 out of the gate. It's been bet down to 3. So obviously the heavy money early has gone on the Tigers. They jumped on that 4.5. Now it's sunk a little bit. And the over-under sitting around 61. Thoughts on that, Travis?
Yeah, those numbers are probably about what I would expect and would steer away from. They don't miss too often with those numbers,
No.
especially the total, because I think we're on the same page in terms of a score range. Somewhere in the right around 60. This could be. I think Alabama can score in the 40s myself. I really do, because I'm not buying this narrative even before the unavailability of 4 or 5 guys for LSU. I mean, the improvement by LSU on the defensive side of the ball had as much to do with Auburn and Army being 2 of the worst offenses in college football than anything else. What I remember most is LSU getting lit by Missouri,
Right.
even though LSU won that game.
FSU.
Ole Miss,
Yeah.
right?
55. Double nickel on them.
And all 3 of those games away from Baton Rouge. So, I probably like Alabama laying the 3 more than I even like messing with that total too much.
Ticket man, Travis, $175 to $200 roughly for those nosebleed seats. And by the way, this is kind of a clawback game for the man because he's had a couple of disappointments this year at Bryant-Denny. That Arkansas homecoming game was a little soft price-wise. So he's hoping these numbers hold as long as they can hold. But the prime seats for this LSU game, Travis, I think are a little soft. I checked it before we came on the air. You can get between the 40s and the lower bowl at Bryant Denny for under $350 right now online. And if you can do that online a couple days out, then you'll be doing better than that on game day.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much LSU's fan base is going to take to Tuscaloosa, because usually that's not in question. Worse LSU teams than this one, and this is a good LSU team, have traveled pretty damn good to Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an easy trip, it's a fun trip. LSU people typically don't need much of a reason to
High
hit the
stakes.
road. They don't even, but maybe that's part of it. It seems like a lot of LSU people, they don't even care if they get in the game. They're there for the party as much as anything else. So maybe that's it. Maybe that has something to do with it.
All right, the Talkin Tide podcast on the Belly Up Podcast Network. Moving on, we're going to thank a couple of sponsors here really quickly. We're going to start by telling you all about Heat Pizza Bar and that fantastic artisan pizza downtown in Government Square. Hey, if you're looking for a great place to take the family away from that craziness on the Strip this weekend, if you're coming in for Alabama-LSU, take them to Heat. Government Square. Flat screens all over the place, plenty of elbow room, super service, and, of course, the best pizza in town. Frank Fleming's fantastic staff is going to get you taken care of with the standard. They've got the Thai chicken pizza that's outstanding. You just can't beat it. Try those jalapeno poppers as well. Great daily specials. That Thursday special, a pepperoni or cheese pizza, just $8 from 2 to 6 p.m., So the next time you're in the mood for some great pizza, check out Heat Pizza Bar at 2256th Street, downtown in Government Square.
I'm going to tell you about Peterbrook Chocolatier at 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa. You talk about a must stop for LSU weekend. It is Peterbrook, right next to our friends at Southern Ale House as you enter Northport. Headed on 82, you're going to find Peterbrook Chocolatier, those chocolate footballs. You got Thanksgiving coming up. Never too early to get those orders in for the holidays, whether it's Thanksgiving. And I know, it's just November 1st, but I'm going to invoke Christmas on this November the 1st, and they'll take great care of you. Peterbrook Chocolatier, 1530 McFarland Boulevard North in the Indian Hills section of Tuscaloosa.
Love it over there at Peterbrook Chocolatier, as always. Final minutes of the program. We'll go through a couple of big games around the Southeastern Conference. We'll jump in that two-deep tumbler really quickly, and then we're going to get out of here. Been a lot of fun getting back at it here on Talkin Tide. Texas A&M at Ole Miss. Travis, let's start right there. Jimbo Fisher on the road taking on Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin with couple of veiled digs at Jimbo,
he can't help himself.
He can't. He's not a Jimbo fan.
The most talented, easily the most talented 5-3 team in the country.
They've done a great job of collecting players. What about that
but
one?
We laugh, but this is a spot where I can see Ole Miss screwing the pooch, for lack of a better way of putting it. This is typically where it has happened for Ole Miss and Lane. So it is a game that you would think Ole Miss would win, but man, A&M and Lane is right. You can't say that's still not a very talented team, and it's still good enough on offense to do enough not to win a shootout against Ole Miss. But what does Ole Miss like to primarily do? They like to run the football, and A&M can match up. They can match up. Although, Tennessee's kind of like Ole Miss in terms of not just how it runs the football, but with tempo. And that seemed to be a real problem for A&M in Knoxville a couple of weeks ago. So maybe that works to Ole Miss's benefit in this one too. But I think it's going to be a hell of a game. I'm looking forward to it.
How about Missouri at Georgia? The only once beaten Missouri Tigers coming to Athens, trying to knock Georgia off. Georgia, of course, coming off of that big win over the arch rival Florida Gators in sunny Jacksonville, Florida. Riding pretty high, Georgia, right now. Travis, what about that one?
Roster game. It's been impressive what Missouri's done to this point, but LSU probably had too much roster ultimately with what it has this year for Missouri at home in that game for Mizzou. So I think, kind of like Florida last week, Florida's not there yet in terms of personnel. I don't think Missouri's there either. I think what Missouri needs is Georgia to revert back to the slow starts that we had seen in the first half of the season. If that happens, then Missouri can hang around for a while. If it doesn't, I think it's going to be a game similar to Kentucky that we saw with Georgia and Florida last week.
Yeah, what Missouri need? Missouri needs that Cook-Burden combination to just have a monster game, right? They need a lot of mileage out of Luther Burden in this game. They end up on the plus side turnovers, which isn't easy to do in Athens. But if they can end up plus on turnovers and Burden burns them enough, they could be in this game late. But Vegas doesn't see it. Certainly, speaking of Vegas, Travis, I think that number is like 14.5.
That's all.
So for a 7-1 Missouri, not getting a ton of respect in the desert for this one.
No, and I'm frankly surprised that line's not higher. But maybe I'll be surprised, and Missouri will go in there and play good football.
Kentucky at Mississippi State, Arkansas at Florida. Either of those do anything for you, Travis? I'll be interested to see what happens to Arkansas down the stretch. Sam Pittman's job's on the line. I don't think there's much question about that. He goes to Gainesville now, and the losses are mounting quickly in Fayetteville.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see from a psyche perspective, where's Florida at after that disappointing performance against Georgia. I was more impressed with Georgia, actually, than I was put off by Florida. Florida got off to a good start and then got rolled from that point forward. But I think for Billy Napier, until he can continue to build and recruit to the level he's recruiting at right now, these are the kind of games you got to win. And for Pittman, you're right. I think he helped himself with the Arkansas fan base by offloading Enos, during the bye week. We'll see to what extent, but that probably gained him some favor with the fan base. But, I still don't think this is a game that Florida can just kind of show up for. Florida is not to that point yet.
All right, finally, we'll jump in that two deep tumbler, and then we are out of here. Give it a quick spin, and we'll see who comes out. Somebody in that Alabama two deep roster. Running out of guys, running out of names, but here one comes now, and it's going to be a double number, Travis. Coming out with 17.
Oh,
17.
Wow.
There you see it. Tresman Marshall and, of course, Isaiah Bond.
Nice double.
A couple key players right there. Marshall, of course, hadn't been right with, I think, a rib injury. Isaiah Bond, a deep threat for that offense for Milroe.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with Marshall to see what his availability is like this week, again, because it's easy to fall into that mindset of we got to be able to play sideline to sideline with Deontay Lawson and Jahad Campbell, and those guys can certainly do that. But you got to still bring it between the tackles. I mean, LSU will still look to get physical, and that's somewhere where Tresman Marshall could help you this week. Isaiah Bond, he's one of those guys. I think with the deficiencies before all these unavailabilities for LSU on the back end, Bond with that speed, Kobe Prentice, those guys, when you get them lined up inside and you get some of those matchups, could be another explosive play opportunity or two for Isaiah Bond. And what about punt returns? With Kool-Aid McKinstry struggles, do we continue to see Kool-Aid back there this week, Chase? Could we see Isaiah Bond or someone else?
Be fun to watch for sure. Jalen Milroe definitely is going to need to hit a couple of more of these deep balls. Jermaine Burton, probably his favorite guy for that. But Isaiah Bond, too, he can definitely take the top off, has several times this season for Alabama. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Talkin Tide podcast. Be sure to join us once again for the Sunday Nighter when we come back and recap Alabama's home game against LSU. Until then, for Travis Reier of BamaOnline.com, I'm Chase Goodbread, sports columnist with the Tuscaloosa News and co-host of Crimson Cover Television. We'll talk to you next time right here on Talkin Tide.